boy returns from death with a horrifying message from Jesus. It began like any other day. The sky was bright, the air carried a soft warmth, and the laughter of children filled the neighborhood park. Ethan, an ordinary 11-year-old boy with a boundless curiosity for life, spent the morning climbing trees, riding his bike, and racing his friends down the street. He was full of life, a spark of energy and joy, his freckled face beaming with enthusiasm. No one, not even Ethan himself, could have guessed how drastically everything was about to change. The afternoon brought a shift in the air. Ethan and his best friend, Danny, had found their way to a quiet, secluded trail near their neighborhood. It wasn't a place they were supposed to be, but it held a sense of adventure they couldn't resist. There was a steep hill near the edge of the trail, dotted with rocks and loose soil, and the boys dared each other to see who could climb it faster. Ethan, always the fearless one, scrambled ahead, determined to beat his friend to the top. But as he neared the crest, the ground beneath him gave way. In an instant, Ethan felt himself slipping, tumbling, falling. The world became a blur of spinning sky and earth. He reached out desperately, his small hands clawing at the air, but there was nothing to grab onto. A sharp pain shot through his body as he hit the bottom of the hill, his head striking a jagged rock. And then, nothing. The vibrant world of sunlight and laughter was gone, replaced by a silent, infinite darkness. Ethan's parents were called in a frantic rush. Paramedics arrived, their faces grave as they worked tirelessly to stabilize the unconscious boy. He was rushed to the hospital, his lifeless body a stark contrast to the energetic child he had been just hours before. Doctors spoke in hushed tones, their expressions betraying the slim odds of his survival. But while everyone around him saw a body that seemed to have slipped away, Ethan was experiencing something entirely different. Ethan's first awareness wasn't fear or pain, but an overwhelming sense of peace. It was as though he had been wrapped in a blanket of warmth and love. The darkness around him wasn't cold or empty, it was comforting, a void that didn't feel void at all. Slowly, he became aware of a light in the distance. It wasn't just any light, it was alive, pulsing softly with warmth and energy. He felt an irresistible pull toward it, like a moth drawn to a flame. As Ethan moved closer, the light grew brighter, enveloping him in a radiance unlike anything he had ever seen. It wasn't blinding or harsh, it was soft, welcoming, and impossibly beautiful. For the first time, he noticed that he wasn't alone. There were shapes, figures, beings of light surrounding him. They didn't speak, but their presence radiated kindness and serenity. Ethan felt no fear, only curiosity. And then he saw him. A figure emerged from the brilliance, distinct and yet part of the light itself. Ethan instinctively knew who it was, though he had never seen him before. Jesus. His presence was indescribable, at once gentle and powerful, humble and majestic. His eyes, impossibly kind yet piercing, seemed to look straight into Ethan's soul. Ethan felt completely known, completely loved, and completely unworthy all at the same time. "Ethan," Jesus said, his voice like music and thunder rolled into one. It wasn't loud, yet it echoed through every part of Ethan's being. "Do not be afraid. You are here for a reason." Ethan stared, unable to speak, his young mind struggling to grasp what was happening. Jesus knelt before him, bringing himself to Ethan's level. "I have brought you here to show you something important," he said. "Something you must tell the world." Ethan found his voice at last, trembling but steady enough. "Why me?" he asked. "I'm just a kid. I don't understand what's happening." Jesus smiled gently. "You will understand in time. For now, you must trust me." With a wave of his hand, Jesus made the surrounding light shift and swirl. Ethan watched as images began to form in the radiant glow. He saw the earth, but it wasn't like the peaceful, happy place he knew. Instead, it was fractured, chaotic. People were shouting, fighting, divided by hatred and fear. Ethan's heart sank as he saw families torn apart, communities crumbling, and despair spreading like a shadow. But then, amidst the darkness, a figure emerged. At first, Ethan couldn't make out who it was. The man stood tall, his posture strong yet approachable. He raised his hand, and the chaos began to settle. People stopped shouting, their anger melting into something else: hope. Ethan's eyes widened as the man stepped further into the light. It was Donald Trump. Ethan was confused. He had heard people argue about Trump before, seen his face on TV, but he never imagined he would see him here in this otherworldly place. "Why is he here?" Ethan asked. Jesus turned to him, his expression serious yet calm. "This man has been chosen for a purpose," he said. "He is not perfect, and his path has been difficult, but he is part of a greater plan. The world will not understand at first, but his victory will signal the beginning of a restoration, a return to faith, unity, and truth." Ethan stared at the vision, his young mind racing. He didn't fully understand what Jesus meant, but he could feel the weight of the words. "What do I do with this?" he asked, his voice small. Jesus placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. "You will return to the world," he said, "and when the time is right, you will share what you have seen. Not everyone will believe you, and the road will be difficult, but you must not lose heart. Remember, the light always overcomes the darkness." As Jesus spoke, Ethan felt himself being pulled backward, the light fading as the warmth of Jesus' presence began to slip away. "Wait!" he cried, reaching out. "I don't want to leave." But Jesus' voice followed him, calm and certain. "It is not yet your time, Ethan. Trust in me." And with that, the light disappeared, and Ethan's world was plunged into darkness once more. Ethan was suspended in darkness, weightless and silent. Just as he began to wonder if he was trapped forever, the darkness began to shift. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, light began to return, forming into something vivid and detailed. At first it was faint and hazy, but soon the images sharpened into a breathtaking vision. Ethan wasn't just watching, he was inside it, experiencing every moment as if it were his own reality. He was standing in the middle of a vast, bustling crowd. People of all races, ages, and backgrounds were gathered, their faces filled with anger and despair. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, as though the weight of the world's pain had settled over them. The sound of shouting and arguing was deafening, a cacophony of voices clashing without resolution. Ethan could feel the tension, the hopelessness, the division cutting through the hearts of everyone present. It was a world on the brink of collapse. Ethan turned, trying to make sense of it all, when suddenly a wave of silence swept through the crowd. It was as if an invisible force had hushed every voice at once. The people began to look around, confused but attentive, their faces shifting from anger to curiosity. That's when Ethan noticed him, a lone figure walking toward the center of the chaos. At first, the man seemed ordinary, his steps steady but unassuming. Yet, as he drew closer, something about him changed. He stood taller, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. Ethan realized it was the same man Jesus had shown him earlier, Donald Trump. The name alone sent a ripple of recognition through Ethan, but here, in this vision, the man seemed different. He wasn't a politician, not in the way the world knew him. He wasn't a man vying for power or fame. Instead, he was something more, something unexpected. Trump raised his hand, not in a gesture of authority, but of reassurance, as if telling the crowd to trust him. And to Ethan's astonishment, they did. The arguments ceased, the tension began to dissipate, and the people leaned in, eager to hear what he had to say. Trump spoke, his voice strong and unwavering, yet filled with a sincerity Ethan had never associated with him before. The words weren't about politics or policies. They were about hope, faith, and unity. Ethan watched as the crowd began to transform. The anger on their faces melted into something else: relief, understanding, even joy. Families that had been divided embraced one another. Strangers who had once shouted insults shared smiles and handshakes. It was as though an invisible veil of darkness had been lifted, revealing a light that had been there all along, waiting to be rediscovered. Jesus' voice echoed in Ethan's mind, breaking the spell of the vision for a moment. "This man is not perfect," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "He has faced trials, made mistakes, and endured the scorn of many, but he has been chosen for this moment, not for his own glory, but for a greater purpose. Through him, the seeds of restoration will be planted. This is not about one man. It is about what he represents, a return to truth, a return to faith, and a return to unity." Ethan wanted to ask more, to understand why Trump had been chosen, but the vision continued, carrying him forward. He saw scenes of rebuilding, not just of buildings, but of trust and community. People came together to help one another, to support each other in ways that had seemed impossible before. The vision shifted again, and Ethan saw Trump standing at a podium, addressing the nation. His words were not of triumph, but of humility, urging people to turn to God, to find strength in their faith, and to stand together as one. Ethan's heart swelled with a mix of emotions he couldn't fully process. It was as if he were watching the world's wounds begin to heal, not through force or fear, but through a collective realization of something greater than themselves. The vision filled him with hope, yet it also left him with questions. How could one man, so polarizing and misunderstood, play such a pivotal role in this transformation? What would it take to make this vision a reality? Before Ethan could dwell on these thoughts, the vision began to fade, the vibrant images dissolving into a soft, golden glow. Jesus turned to him, his expression filled with compassion. "Do you understand now?" he asked. Ethan hesitated, unsure of how to answer. "I think so," he said finally. "But what if people don't believe me? What if they don't listen?" Jesus smiled, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "It won't be easy," he said. "Many will doubt you, and some will reject your words. But the truth has a way of finding those who need it most. Speak with courage and leave the rest to me." The light around them began to grow brighter, almost blinding, and Ethan felt himself being pulled away. "Wait," he called out, panic rising in his voice. "I'm not ready. I don't know what to do." But Jesus' voice followed him, calm and unwavering. "You will know when the time is right, Ethan. Trust in me." And then it was over. Ethan was back in the darkness, his body heavy and unfamiliar. Slowly, painfully, he opened his eyes to find himself in a hospital room, surrounded by the beeping of machines and the tearful faces of his parents. He had returned, but he was forever changed. The vision, the message, the mission, it was all etched into his heart, waiting for the moment when he would be ready to share it with the world. Ethan's eyes fluttered open, the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room blinding him. For a moment, he felt disoriented, the events of the past hours, or was it days, fading in and out of focus like a dream he couldn't quite hold on to. His body felt heavy, every limb weighed down as though he had run a marathon and collapsed at the finish line. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled his nostrils, mingling with the distant hum of monitors. Slowly, his senses sharpened, and he became aware of two blurry figures leaning over him. "Ethan!" His mother's voice cracked with emotion, and suddenly her face came into view, her eyes red and swollen from crying. His father stood just behind her, his usual stoic expression replaced by one of pure, unguarded relief. Ethan felt his mother's hands grasp his own, trembling yet firm, as if she was afraid that letting go would mean losing him again. "Mom?" Ethan croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. His throat felt dry and raw, as if he hadn't spoken in days. Tears streamed down his mother's face as she nodded, her smile wide but trembling. "You're here, baby? You're okay? We thought we lost you." Ethan's mind reeled as he tried to process everything. He could remember falling, the pain, the darkness. But then there was the light, the presence, and the words spoken by Jesus. His heart raced as he recalled the visions, the overwhelming sense of peace, and the urgency of the message he had been given. It was all so vivid, so real, yet here he was, back in the mundane reality of hospital walls and beeping monitors. Was it a dream? A hallucination? No, it couldn't have been. It was too clear, too purposeful. He had been shown something extraordinary, something he could never forget. The next few days passed in a blur of medical evaluations and cautious optimism. The doctors marveled at Ethan's recovery, calling it a miracle. "There's no way he should have survived that fall," one of them remarked to his parents. "The trauma to his head alone. It's incredible he's awake, let alone speaking." Ethan overheard their words, but his focus was elsewhere. His mind was consumed by what he had seen and heard, the mission that had been entrusted to him. He felt a burning desire to tell someone, anyone, about his experience, but every time he opened his mouth, doubt crept in. Would they believe him? Would they think he was crazy? Even he struggled to fully grasp the enormity of it. One evening, as his parents sat by his bedside, Ethan decided to share a small piece of his story. "Mom, Dad," he began hesitantly, his voice trembling, "something happened while I was gone." His parents exchanged a nervous glance, their expressions cautious but attentive. I saw Jesus." His mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. His father leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean, son?" he asked, his voice low and serious. Ethan hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "He spoke to me," he continued. "He showed me things about the world, about people, about what's going to happen." His parents listened in stunned silence as Ethan shared fragments of his experience. He told them about the light, the overwhelming sense of peace, and the message that the world was at a crossroads. He didn't mention Trump, not yet. It felt too specific, too controversial to bring up without understanding it better himself. But even the little he shared left his parents shaken. "That's incredible, Ethan," his mother said, her voice trembling. "But are you sure it wasn't just a dream? Sometimes, when we're hurt, our minds can play tricks on us." "It wasn't a dream, Mom," Ethan insisted, his voice firm despite his fear of being dismissed. "I know it wasn't. It was real. He was real." The days turned into weeks, and Ethan's life slowly returned to normal, or as normal as it could be after such an experience. He went back to school, saw his friends, and tried to pretend everything was the same. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant to do something, to share what he had seen, but the fear of rejection kept him silent. Then, one day, everything changed. Ethan was sitting in his living room, half listening to the news as he worked on his homework. His parents were in the kitchen, talking quietly, when a breaking news alert flashed across the screen. Ethan looked up, and his heart nearly stopped. The headline read, "Donald Trump declared winner of presidential election." Ethan froze, his pencil slipping from his fingers. He stared at the screen, his mind racing. He hadn't followed the election closely. It wasn't something an 11-year-old usually cared about. But now, seeing Trump's face on the screen, he was transported back to the vision. The same man, the same presence, the same message. It was all happening, just as Jesus had shown him. "Mom, Dad!" Ethan called out, his voice urgent. His parents rushed into the room, alarmed by his tone. "Look," he said, pointing at the TV. They turned to the screen, their faces puzzled. "What is it, Ethan?" his dad asked. "It's just the election results." "No, it's not just that," Ethan said, his voice trembling with emotion. "This is what he showed me. This is part of it. Don't you see? It's happening." His parents exchanged a worried glance, unsure of how to respond. Ethan could feel their doubt, their hesitation, but he didn't care. For the first time since his experience, he felt a sense of clarity, a certainty that he couldn't ignore. The time to stay silent was over. He had been given a message, a purpose, and he couldn't hold it in any longer. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the moment he had been waiting for was finally here. The vision, the message, the purpose, it was all converging, and he felt a burning need to act. Yet, as he sat in his room that night, staring at the flickering light of a single candle on his desk, doubt began to creep in. What if no one believed him? What if they thought he was making it all up? He wasn't a preacher or a prophet. He was just a kid. He sat there for hours, the candlelight casting dancing shadows on the walls. Finally, he made a decision. He grabbed his notebook, the one he used for drawing comics and scribbling down random ideas, and began writing. He wrote everything: the fall, the darkness, the light, Jesus' presence, and the vision of the world's chaos. He wrote about Trump, the transformation, the restoration, and Jesus' words about truth and unity. It was messy and unorganized, but it was all there, his experience laid bare. The next morning, Ethan walked into the living room, clutching the notebook like a lifeline. His parents were seated at the dining table, drinking coffee and reading the news. "Mom, Dad," he said, his voice firm despite the butterflies in his stomach, "I need to tell you everything, the whole story." His parents exchanged a cautious glance but nodded, setting down their cups. Ethan sat down and opened the notebook. He began to read aloud, his voice steady and unwavering. As he spoke, his parents' expressions shifted from skepticism to amazement to something resembling fear. When he finished, the room was silent. "Ethan," his father said at last, his voice low and uncertain, "this is a lot to take in." "I know," Ethan said, his eyes pleading, "but it's the truth. I saw it. He showed me everything, and now it's happening." His mother wiped a tear from her cheek. "Honey, we believe that you believe this," she said gently. "But you have to understand how unusual this all sounds. People might not understand." Ethan nodded, his heart sinking. He had expected this reaction, but it still hurt. "I'm not asking everyone to believe me," he said. "I just need to share it. It's what he told me to do." And so, Ethan began to tell his story. He started small, sharing it with his closest friends. Some of them laughed, others stared at him like he had lost his mind. But a few listened, a few believed. Encouraged by their reactions, Ethan grew bolder. He spoke about his experience at his church, trembling with nerves as he stood before the congregation. The room fell silent as he spoke, and when he finished, the pastor placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "God works in mysterious ways. Perhaps he is working through you." Word began to spread. People in his town started whispering about the boy who had seen Jesus, who had a message about Trump and the future of the world. Some were curious, others dismissive, but it didn't matter to Ethan. He knew he had to keep going. Then came the backlash. People accused him of seeking attention, of making it all up for fame or money. Others twisted his words, claiming he was pushing a political agenda. Ethan, barely 12 years old, found himself the target of ridicule and anger. He cried himself to sleep some nights, questioning why Jesus had chosen him for such a heavy burden. But in his darkest moments, he remembered Jesus' words, "The truth has a way of finding those who need it most." One evening, as Ethan scrolled through comments on a video someone had posted of him speaking, he noticed something unexpected. Among the criticism and doubt were messages of hope. People from all over the country were sharing how his story had touched them, inspired them to pray, or rekindled their faith. Some said they had felt lost and divided, but were now finding their way back to God. Ethan realized that the message wasn't for everyone. It was for those who were ready to hear it. Ethan's story continued to grow, reaching more people than he could have ever imagined. But through it all, he never let it become about himself. Every time he spoke, he reminded people that he was just a messenger. "This isn't about me," he would say. "It's about what he showed me. It's about us coming together, turning back to faith, and finding hope again." As time went on, Ethan saw the world around him begin to change. It wasn't overnight, and it wasn't easy, but little by little, people began to listen. Communities that had been divided started to mend. Families that had been torn apart found their way back to each other. And amidst it all, the man Ethan had seen in his vision, Donald Trump, stood tall as a leader not of division, but of unity. He spoke of faith, hope, and a brighter future, and people began to believe. Ethan watched it all unfold, his heart swelling with a mix of awe and gratitude. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew one thing for certain: the light always overcomes the darkness, and as long as there was even one person willing to carry that light, the world would never truly be lost.